Hi developers, in this video we'll learn how to create the CI and CD pipelines to deploy an application into Azure Kubernetes Service, AKS. For that we'll be using Visual Studio Team Services, VSTS. For the CI pipeline, we'll connect to a repository on GitHub to get the source code and the YAML files. Then we'll use the Docker task in order to build and push the Docker container into Docker Hub. This image will be used later from the CD pipeline, where here we'll get the image and deploy it to AKS using the kubectl commands. This deployment right here is a bit tricky because in our YAML file we always specify the static version of our Docker container. For that we'll be adding another task that will try to update the latest tag used for our Docker container. So join me in this video to show you how we can do this. So here I'll start from VSTS, where here I'll go and create a new project. So I'll say, for example, the project name should be Angular App Kubernetes. Then I'll hit create. Once that's done, now I can go directly to the builds section right here to start creating my CI pipeline. So let's start creating a new pipeline. Here I'll specify the source code for my app, which is hosted on GitHub. So by the way, the app is on GitHub. It's publicly available, where you will find the source code for the empty Angular app along with the file for Docker file, and also the deployment YAML files which we'll be using today in order to deploy to AKS. So let's specify, or let's connect to our GitHub account. I'll go and say authorize GitHub. Once that's done, now I can access to my GitHub repositories. I look for the repository right here, Angular App Kubernetes. I'll go and select it. So actually here you can go and fork this project if you want to start from this video. But if you want to take a look at the previous videos where I showed how to create the Docker file and build, run and push the Docker image, and also deploy to Azure using the dashboard, but here we'll be deploying using the DevOps strategy. So here we choose the project from GitHub. Now I'll go and say continue, and from here I can start from an empty template, but I can also start with a template that have two tasks, which is the one right here, Docker container. This one will help me to build and push the image into Docker Hub. So I'll select this one, and here you see that the agent that was selected is the hosted Linux preview, which have the full installation of the full install of containers and that machine. But just here you can continue with that. For me, I'll just pick my my agent that I have created so that I can deploy faster. Then the first task here is build an image. So to build the image, here it is asking where we want to push this image. We can push it to Azure Container Registry, ACR, but here I'm gonna push to Docker Hub. For that I pick the container registry. Then I need to connect to Docker Hub. For that I go and select new right here, and because I have already connected before, here it saves my Docker ID and my password. Let's give a name for this connection. Let's call it Docker Hub connection, and let's verify that our credentials was the right ones. That's verified. Cool. Now we can carry on, and here we need to specify the build for this task. So this will run the Docker command, and we can specify exactly which command we want to use. So we'll start by building the image so we can create it. Then for the Docker file, here it will look for the Docker file from our app. I can go and specify the Docker file from my GitHub repository, so I'll go and pick this one. So it have the Docker file, and now we can or we need to configure the image name. So here to configure the image name, I need to add my Docker ID. My Docker ID here, if I go to my account where I have created the account, it's the one displayed at the top right of my screen. So I'll use this value to tag my image. It will be actually used to tag the image. So let's use that one. Cool. Now the build task is ready to be run. Then we'll go to configure the push. And for the push right here, we go again and say we want to use Docker Hub instead of Azure ACR. And then we need to specify the connection that we have already created at the previous task in order to be able to connect and push to Docker Hub. This action will be pushing an image. I'm okay with that. And now for the image name, again, I'll go and specify the same image name that I have used inside the build task, because this one will try to get the image that I already created and it will try to push it to Docker Hub. Cool, now I'm ready to run this pipeline. But now, after this CI pipeline, we want to create the CD pipeline. And for the CD pipeline, we need to run the YAML deployment files into Kubernetes. For that, I need to pass those files from here where I have access to source control. I need to pass them to the CD pipeline, because from the CD pipeline, actually, I don't have, let's say, I don't have access to the GitHub repository. So I'll pass them from here. So how to do that? I'm gonna add two tasks. The first one, it will copy the task or copy the files to a specific folder. And the task we'll be using here is copy files. So let's add that, and then we'll add another task which will publish the YAML files into the drop folder, which will be saved persistently. So let's look for publish build artifacts. It's this one. And if we take a look at publish artifact right here, by default it takes all the content published inside this folder, which is the build artifact staging directory, and it will publish it into a folder called drop. So we can get this drop folder, or we can access it from our CD pipeline. So I'll put my YAML files inside this directory. I'll do that using the copy task. So from here, I'll go and say the source folder should be where I do have my deployment. Here we do have two deployment YAML files. One we use it inside or to deploy the image into a local Kubernetes cluster, and this one will deploy to a cluster hosted on Azure. Remember, the difference between the two is the usage of load balancer for this file. The local file uses the node port. So let's click on that, and then let's here go and move the file into content. Let's remove the two stars. So the source folder is the root folder for my repository on GitHub, and then the content is this file. Then for the target folder, here we will say we want to copy this file to the file used by the publish task, which is the actually I should copy it again, then I'll paste it right here. The build artifact staging directory, which will be copied later or published later from using the publish task into the drop folder. Good, now we are ready to run this task. So let's hit save and queue. Save and queue, and let's take a look at the execution of this task. So it will start by getting the source code from GitHub, then it will build the image. Our image here it's a Docker that contains an Angular application. It's an empty application that shows only this page right here. So we want to now to deploy it into Azure Kubernetes. But unfortunately here the build fails. Why? Because if we dig into the logs right here, we find that here it tried to tag the image as the name right here. So this should be my Docker ID. Then it adds the name as it gets it from my GitHub repo. So because we did say the name of the repo, then it used those two names using the 2 slashes, and that's not allowed on a Docker Hub. It actually here picked this name right here. So to fix this, it's simple. We can go back to build an image, and from here we go to refresh. Then inside build an image, we want to specify a static name for our image. Let's say I want to call it Angular app, for example. And we need to reuse the same name for the push an image task. Copy that, then let's go save and queue again. And now the process was run successfully. So if I go here to my GitHub account, then here the latest image was this one. Now if I refresh, I should see a new one was added right here. Good. Now we want to deploy this image into Kubernetes service on Azure. For that, I'll go back to Azure DevOps, and from here I'll go and create the pipeline for the CD or the release. I'll click new pipeline in order to create the CD pipeline or the release, and here I can start from an empty template, but I can also choose one of those built-in templates. So here I do have the template that I want to use, which is deploy to Kubernetes cluster. I'll apply this template, and here it creates an environment for me. So I'll say, for example, this is going to be my production environment. I'm okay with that, and here I can specify an artifact, and the artifact is the input for my CD pipeline. Here we can choose from a Docker Hub, Azure Container Registry, packages, TeamCity, Jenkins, and so on. But here I'm gonna choose the build, which is the default selected one, and I select my build pipeline to be the one that we already created. And then I'll hit add, and here our production environment contains one job and one task, that is the kubectl apply. So let's configure this task. Right here we do have the name for this task. Note that here we are using the V0 and not the 1. Of course you can choose also the 1 if you want. Here we need to specify a connection to Kubernetes. So for that I'll go and create a new one right here. I say this uses kubeconfig, and I'll say this is my Kubernetes connection. I need to specify the service URL and the kubeconfig. How can we get those values? Actually here if we go to the command line, we do have a special command to get the configuration files for Kubernetes. So here I'll go and use the command kubectl config view --row. This will generate this config files, and so I need to go and copy the content of this file. I'll copy it, then I'll use it right here for the value for my kubeconfig. I'll paste it, but here we still need the service URL. How can we get the service URL? It's actually embedded here. It's the one that ends with azmq8s. So let's copy this value right here. And we use it here for the service URL. We'll check the accept and trusted certificates, and we'll verify the connection. Here it says it's verified. Cool. Now I can click OK. and it will take my connection. Then here for the namespace, if we keep this empty, it will use the default namespace, but of course you can create your own namespace for testing, for example. We'll use the command apply, and note we have also some other commands like the create, delete, exec, and so on. Here we are fine with the apply command. For the apply, we can use the arguments inside a command line, but we can also use the configuration files. Here we'll be using the command kubectl apply -f, then the path to the YAML deployment file, and from here, from this entry, we need to specify the path for the YAML file. I'll go and click here to get the YAML file that should be inside the drop folder that was generated during the CI pipeline, and here it is, our YAML file. I click OK, and then that's all the required configuration for this task in order to apply the deployment to AKS. We note that we have some other options, useful options, like creating the secrets, like the connection strings, for example, or any secrets you use on your app. We do have also config maps, which will store our key values that we could use them as global environment and global environment variables inside AKS. And we have also some other advanced options like specifying the version of Kubernetes we are using. Great, so now we have our task in the CD pipeline configured in order to run the YAML deployment file to deploy the created Docker container. But if we take a look at the YAML file that we have created, we can see that here we do have a little problem. That is, it will try to always deploy the v1 of our Docker container. But during the CI pipeline, we have created a new image and we tagged it using the build ID. We want to actually to deploy that newer image instead of this v1. So how can we change this value dynamically during the CD pipeline? To do that, here I'll use a task which have the role of replacing the tokens. This task is called replace tokens. I'll go and grab this one. I'll add it just before the kubectl apply task. This task is easily configured, so it will look for the root directory for my file. I'll go and say the root directory is the one that have its path, the deployment.azure.yaml. But in this here, we need to only specify the direct or the path to the folder, and in the next right here we specify the target file. So instead of looking for a config file, I say look for my deployment.azure.yaml file. Then here inside the advanced, we have the token used as a prefix and another one used as suffix. So it will look for those two characters inside my YAML file, and it will try to replace them. So this means I need to use those tokens inside the YAML file. So I'll go and copy it, then come in here, I'll go and replace v1 with this prefix, and the same for the suffix. So I'll go and copy it and paste it here, and inside here I'll use the environment variable defined by VSTS. Here I'll use the one that I have already defined to tag my image, which is the build.buildID. So I'll use that. Now we should have a new Docker image created, and to see a visual stage for that new Docker image, I'll go to the app component.html, which is inside the SRC app, and here I'll go and use or I'll add just a simple static text right here that will tell me this Angular app is running in a Docker container inside Azure Kubernetes service, and this text is the one that will be displayed along with this one. Good. Now let's push our changes into GitHub so that VSTS can get the new app version. To do that, I'll go and use the command line. I'll go and say git add, then git commit with the command. Then we'll push the changes. When we go here to GitHub, go refresh, we see here that the change was added. Then here I need to rerun again the CI pipeline. For that, I'd go and say queue. We need to wait until this finishes running. Now that this runs successfully, you can go to Docker Hub and check if the image was added successfully. So note here the latest image is 818, but here I should see a newer image added to my Docker Hub account. Now I'm ready to go and run the release. So I'll go and save this, then I'll create a new release. Let's say create, and let's follow the log for the running execution. Now we can see that the deployment was done successfully. So let's check if our edits was done successfully or not. So I'll go back to the dashboard. I'll go and refresh, and here I should see that here we do have some deployment in progress. So here it's creating the Angular deployment, and it is still creating the last container, because here we have specified 5. We want to create 5 containers, so it is creating them, and here it is creating the Angular service. Let's refresh again and check the status. And here it finished creating the 5 containers and also the service. So and here we do have the external endpoint from which we can access our application hosted on Docker on Kubernetes. Let's click on that, and here we should get the Angular app, the interface like this one, but with the new message that we have specified. And here it is, our Angular app is running in a Docker container inside Azure Kubernetes Service AKS. Cool. Now our app is deployed successfully. So we can go right here and see all the resources created from the dashboard, but we can also go to use the command line, and here I'll go and say clear, and we can go and look for all the configuration that was created. I'll go and say kubectl get services, then we get the list of our Angular service that was created with the external IP. We can also go and say kubectl get pods to get our 5 pods, or also get the deployments. I hope you liked this video where we have created the CI and CD pipelines to host a Docker image into Azure Kubernetes service, where in the CI we have built and pushed the image into Docker Hub. Then from the CD pipeline we have applied or used the task kubectl apply in order to use the YAML file that we have created in order to apply its configuration into Azure AKS. So thank you for watching.